Well, good afternoon. I appreciate the welcoming committee you sent out on the front street there. That was great. It's always nice to have a little bit of a welcome before you come to the building. I also want to introduce my daughter, Reagan, to you. Reagan, you want to stand up, say hi? Give everybody a wave. Reagan's 8 years old. And as the name suggests, Morgan and Kobach indicates she's getting Republican training. So, as you all know, when I campaigned 4 years ago, I campaigned on making Kansas the safest state against election fraud in the country. We've achieved that. In 2011, the legislature passed the SAFE Act, the Secure and Fair Elections Act, which I drafted, my office drafted, which made Kansas the first state in America to combine photo ID at the polls, equivalent security for mail-in ballots, and proof of citizenship when you register to vote. First state in America to accomplish that. I think that's a great accomplishment. But the Obama administration and the ACLU don't think it's a great accomplishment. And so we've been battling both of those entities in the courts. As many of you know, my background is as a constitutional law professor and as a litigator. We recently won against the Obama administration on our proof of citizenship provisions on March 19th in federal district court here in Wichita. And that was a great victory. The state of Kansas and the state of Arizona jointly sued this federal agency that was creating a loophole in our proof of citizenship law. And we sued on the basis of Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution, which gives we, the states, the right to control who can vote and to police the qualifications for voting. And the federal district court agreed with our position. The Obama administration lost. They are now appealing, and that case is pending in the 10th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. So we had one victory under our belt, and then last Friday, a week ago, the ACLU had their day in court. This was in state court, in Shawnee County District Court. And I'm pleased to say that, again, we were blessed with a victory in front of a state court judge against the ACLU's argument. So at this point, the state of Kansas is 2-0 in defending our laws, and that's a good thing. And I'm campaigning because I want to preserve the achievements we've made. And these achievements are not just ones that conservatives in Kansas think are great. Other states are following our lead. Other states are adopting the Kansas model, and that was our objective all along. Alabama has adopted our proof of citizenship provisions word for word. Scratch out Kansas, write the word Alabama, and you've got their law. Pennsylvania has adopted a version of our absentee ballot, our vote by mail provisions. Again, following the Kansas model. Other states are looking at our Kansas model now, including Mississippi as well. Now, if you want to preserve our model that we've set for the country, you've got to defend it in court, because the Obama administration and the ACLU, which increasingly look like the same thing, are not going home. Indeed, the ACLU seems to have taken up residence inside the Obama Justice Department, and the Department of Justice was a once proud institution for which I worked under Attorney General Ashcroft. It is not that today. But if you don't want to fight the good fight, if you want to pack up your bags and go home and say we don't like our laws anymore, then I would encourage you to vote for my opponent, because he has taken a position that is diametrically opposed to that. He opposes photo ID and opposes proof of citizenship. And since this is a debate, I think it is important to make those contrasts clear. But I should remind everyone of one thing. The Republican Party stands with Kansas. And I'm not just talking about the Republican Party of Kansas. I'm talking about the National Republican Party. I had the great honor to serve as one of Kansas's 2 delegates on the 2012 Platform Committee at the convention. And the platform, which we passed, says this: honest elections are the foundation of representative government. We applaud legislation to require photo identification for voting and to prevent election fraud, particularly with regard to registration and absentee ballots. We support state laws that require proof of citizenship at the time of voter registration to protect our electoral system against significant and growing form of voter fraud. Every time a fraudulent vote is cast, it effectively cancels out the vote of a legitimate voter. That's the position of the Republican Party. That's the position that the state of Kansas embodies for the nation. Now, elections are about contrast, and there are other issues that you should be aware of when you select a candidate. You all know my positions. I'm very open about them. I'm conservative right down the line of issues. My opponent, however, ran for the state Senate in 2008, and his positions are quite different. In a survey for that position, he said he opposes the Kansas law permitting the concealed carry of firearms. He supports in-state tuition for illegal aliens. He believes that, quote, abortions should always be legal, end quote. He supports implementing a new carbon tax to reduce fossil fuel emissions. He supports changing Kansas law to allow civil union for gay couples in Kansas, and, of course, opposes the photo ID requirement to vote. I suggest that this is a Republican primary we are having, and we should have a Republican candidate on the ballot. Thank you very much.
Are we ready there? Well, thank you very much for having me here. It is an honor to be at this club. I appreciate the invitation, and I also wanted to particularly point out John Todd. I know trying to organize any kind of group of candidates is difficult, and he does it with a level of graciousness that is really remarkable. So I hope you all appreciate the work that he does for putting on these programs. I am Scott Morgan. I am running for Secretary of State in the Republican primary. Who am I and why am I doing this? My family moved to Kansas in 1856 before there was a Kansas. I'm a fifth-generation Kansan. We've been Republican since there was a Republican Party in Kansas. It's woven deep within my family fabric. I grew up in Shawnee. My father was a reporter with the Kansas City Star, graduated from KU undergrad and law school, went to work for Senator Kassebaum in Washington and Senator Dole. I represented the United States Senate on the Federal Election Commission. I was Senator Bob Dole's chief counsel for his '88 presidential campaign. After that was over, my wife Kathleen and I were expecting our first child. We moved back to Kansas, and I was chief counsel for Governor Mike Hayden. In 1990, I was the Republican nominee for Congress against Jim Slattery in the 2nd District. After that really didn't work out, I decided it was time to try the private side. My wife and I started a publishing business, and for 17 years, we worked to build that business. It's a book business on state and city statistics. 2007, we were able to sell that to Congressional Quarterly, and I continue to work on a few of the annual publications. Having your own business is a lot of struggle, but it also gives you a certain amount of flexibility. My wife and I took our 3 children on summer vacations each year camping throughout the country. We went to all 50 states, 48 of them in a minivan. I can handle lots of things, so I appreciate the difficulty that I'm up against today. In addition to taking our family around, I served 2 terms on the Lawrence School Board, and as Mr. Kobach said, I was the Republican nominee for State Senate in Lawrence. If you want a lonely job, try being the Republican nominee in Lawrence on anything. And in 2008, it was not a good year for me. I was far too conservative for Lawrence. And I understand that, and I appreciate that I have differences of opinions on issues that he mentioned with some of you here. I also think that that probably has nothing to do with the duties of the Secretary of State. And that is my goal. I don't have any interest in being president or governor or anything else. I want to be Secretary of State, and that will be my full-time focus. It has no more relevance than the fact that last week I stood with Mr. Kobach at a gathering here in Wichita, and he talked about, again, his great support for what many of you may support, the fair tax, which would eliminate the federal income tax and replace it with a 23% across-the-board sales tax on everything. Home sales, cars, whatever, it would be there. I think that's interesting. I wouldn't support it, but I understand it, but it also has nothing to do with Secretary of State. And so it was odd that we were there, I think, discussing it, but I show up where I'm invited. And so what I'm trying to focus, the reason I am running is for 2 main reasons. One, it is a full-time job for which Kansans pay $86,000 a year. And when Mr. Kobach is out running around the country earning thousands of dollars in legal fees, representing clients, no matter how much you agree with those issues, they have nothing to do with the Secretary of State. This is his full-time professional job. He does not have his own time. He mocks his predecessors and say they just played golf, and he shows how they took their stroke at Topeka Country Club. Well, I think Mr. Thornburg and Bill Graves and Jack Breyer were actually very admirable Secretaries of State, and I think they did put their full professional duties into this office. And the second reason I'm running is for the right to vote. And yes, I do have a disagreement on the citizenship papers in particular. I understand voter ID is very popular, and that is something that all of these things would have to be changed by legislation. I think with any government regulation, you want to make sure it is doing less harm than good. You want to make sure it is solving the problem. And I think in particular with citizenship papers, when you have a Secretary of State bragging and the number floats around, either 72% or 82% of people who have tried to register have succeeded, that is a miserable rate. The point of this office is to defend our right to vote. It is a right, not a privilege. It is not something the government gives us, like a driver's license. It is our sacred right, and upon which everything else depends. And I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Libertarian, unaffiliated Republican. I want you to think that the Secretary of State is a nonpartisan, fair judge of that and a defender of your right. And that's what I want to return this to. And yes, there are differences, but I appreciate the chance to discuss this with you today, and I look forward to further discussion. Thank you again for inviting me.
I'd like to respond to a number of things Mr. Morgan said. He said, you know, these other issues don't matter, fair tax, whatever. Hey, Secretary of State, that's filing business forms and that's elections, nothing more. Well, I'd like to make him familiar with some of the other things I've had to do in my job as Secretary of State over the past 4 years. The Secretary of State, he may not know, serves on the State Regulations Board. And one of the regulations we had to decide to approve or not to approve was a regulation governing the requirements for abortion clinics and whether they had to meet the medical conditions of hospitals. I took the pro-life position in my vote on that regulation. And then just last year, the legislature passed a bill about concealed carry, and it applied to government buildings, as you know. Well, the Secretary of State and the Attorney General are the two tenants in the Memorial Hall building. We had to decide what to do, and I pushed very strongly for having concealed carry in our building. And I'm happy to say that any of you can come visit me in the building, and you can conceal carry, and you can conceal carry right into my office, and I'm happy with that. That's the thing that the Secretary of State has to be aware of. It's not just one issue. Now, he says that I've represented clients. I have. I'm currently representing 10 ICE agents who are suing the Obama administration for its lawlessness when it comes to illegal immigration. And he says, well, it's a 24/7 job. You can't do anything else other than think about being Secretary of State. Well, I wonder if the prior Secretaries of State were thinking about it when they were lining up for the pin on hole number 5 on the Topeka Country Club. Obviously, a person has time off. Some people spend their time off playing golf. I choose to spend my time off fighting for the sovereignty of the United States and for the rule of law. And my opponent finally says that there's all kinds of, thousands of Kansans now, it numbers about 19,000 people who haven't completed their registration since January 1st, 2013. He says they're being prohibited from voting. No, they're not. They can finish it today. If they're in this room, they can finish it with their smartphone and email it in. You take a picture of your birth certificate, you email it in, you're done. They aren't being prevented from anything. They are simply not yet completing the process. Thank you.
Thank you. I think when you take a look at the activities that he takes part in, I clearly never said that you don't have your own time. I said you can't have two professional jobs. No one who has ever been an employer who has hired a professional employee, particularly an attorney. Now, you can hire from a firm and you pay them by the hour, but if you have on your staff a full-time professional attorney, you would have serious issues if that person was making tens of thousands of dollars each year representing other clients on their own time. Of course you have your own time. I'm just saying you can't have two professional jobs. By definition, that's what you can't do. And take the ICE agency that's where it gets into the bizarre. You have him suing the federal government because they're not allowing these agents to enforce federal law. Then he comes back to Kansas and drafts legislation, which many of you may approve of, that would make it a federal crime, or make it a state crime, for federal agents to come in and enforce certain federal laws. So in one case, he's suing the government because they won't allow the agents to enforce it. In another case, he wants to create a penalty for federal agents who try to enforce another federal law in the state, all of which, by the way, has nothing to do with Secretary of State. That's where we get into this confusion. I respect that he does all these things, but when he calls himself the guardian of state sovereignty, that's not what the Secretary of State is. And I know we disagree on that, but because you notarize legal documents doesn't make you the guardian of state sovereignty. I think we have an office that deserves full time and deserves full professional energies. And so I think that's why I'm running.
If they are born in Kansas, we do more than give them the address of the Office of Vital Statistics. We get the information from the Office of Vital Statistics and confirm their birth in the United States for them. So if you're born in Kansas and you're among the 19,000 who have not yet completed your registration, we will verify it for you. We do it in batches every month, so it might not occur the day that you register, but within a month, you will have your birth in Kansas confirmed that you are a U.S. citizen. In addition to that, we also send in a mailing to every single person reminding them, hey, to complete your registration, you're not fully registered yet. We also make a phone call. Every single county is making a phone call. In some counties, they were doing additional phone calls to these people. So we're reaching out in every way. We're also reaching out through other forms of media, through the internet, and through the counties. They're doing their own forms of advertising to encourage people. Some counties are being very aggressive and actually, trying to track down these people to encourage them to vote. But at some point, we have to recognize that registering is itself a voluntary decision. If you want to register to vote, you can. If you don't want to, and the Supreme Court has recognized this, you don't have to register to vote. And so we have to allow people to make the decision. We provide so much help to them. We provide also, in the case of someone who's in this is a very rare situation, only 2 people so far in the whole state have been in the situation where you don't have any documents, and you are in a situation like maybe you were born a long time ago and not born in a hospital, something like that. We have a process where there is a state board that can be convened, and you can present other documents to establish that you were born in the United States or that you are a U.S. citizen by some other derivation. So we have that fourth process as well. And it's only been used 2 times because, frankly, pretty much everybody has the documents they need, and you can get a replacement birth certificate for free. I didn't mention that. That's the 5th one we have. So we really are reaching out and trying to help people. But at the end of the day, if people procrastinate or they just don't want to respond to the government letter, we can't force them to.
I think this is it's a great question, and I think we should do all that we can to help these people. And if you talk to any county clerk or election commissioner, they are spending a great amount of resources trying to help these people. And I think that is the problem I have is you're trying to help people who are in trouble, having trouble registering, that was created by government, trying to solve a problem that I don't think existed. And if it did exist, the burden of this solution should have fallen on the state, not on the individual. For 150 years, we had elections where we all registered to vote just by signing that we were citizens under penalty of law. Now, actually, until 1917, we didn't have to be citizens. We amended the Constitution because before then, you just had to sign a statement that you intended to become a citizen. But we did add that thing in 1917, and that's how we all registered. He says the registrations rolls are filled with aliens, but we did nothing to cleanse the rolls in terms of going out and making all of us re-register and produce these papers. This is only for the new people, like my 18-year-old daughter, a 6th-generation Kansan, who sits there, and I watched her do it, tried to register online. It's an incredibly clunky system. It freezes in one browser. 18-year-olds love it when things freeze up. They love registering to vote in the first place. And then she goes to the next one, gets all the way through. There's no way to get any kind of a confirmation that whether it went through, and she says, well, I guess I'm registered. I watched her upload the picture of her passport, nothing. And about a week later, we get a letter, and she's been rejected. And she just starts laughing, goes, I didn't make the cut. It says she didn't have her birth certificate or her proof of citizenship. Well, then the press finds out about it, and lo and behold, it comes because it's 2 different systems, and all Mr. Kobach can say is the amazing thing here is not that there was a problem, was that a man was faster than a computer, that the county clerk in Douglas County sent out a notice that she'd been rejected before their system could put the picture back together with, I'm not even sure I'm describing this right, it was a mess. And it was a problem that didn't exist, and we created a mess to solve it.
The short answer to your question is that Kansas law allows what's called an election contest, where it's actually a procedure in front of a judge after the election. And it's very difficult to overturn an election after the fact. Indeed, it's almost impossible because you have to bring voters, if it's a close election, you have to bring the voters and put them on the stand and then establish that they voted for candidate A when in fact candidate B should have won because the voter was not eligible to vote. So it's almost impossible. That's why we put these screens up at the front end. That's why we have the proof of citizenship we do. And he says the problem never existed. This was, we've been doing it for so long in Kansas. Let's just keep it with the status quo. No, the problem exists. Let me give you a couple examples. Seward County, 1997. A few months before this was a ballot issue on a hog farming operation, which Kansas law requires that the county residents approve if it's going to go into effect. A few months before the election, Seward County Clerk reports, and this was in testimony to the Kansas legislature from her successor, reports that a big envelope comes from the hog rending plant down in Guyman, Oklahoma, full of registration cards from people working at the plant, and they were for made-up addresses in liberal Kansas. But she had to register them. She also believed that they were not U.S. citizens, since most of the people working at the plant were not U.S. citizens. It doesn't matter whether they're legal or illegal. And then on election day, minivan after minivan load arrived from the meatpacking plant in Guyman, Oklahoma, with individuals voting in that operation. There was a translator who had to translate the ballots for them. And again, she believed they were not U.S. citizens, but she was powerless to stop it. Well, now we have a screen in place to ensure that only U.S. citizens are voting. And remember, every time a U.S. citizen votes, it cancels out the vote. A non-U.S. citizen vote, it cancels out the vote of a citizen. And when we have close elections, that's what makes a difference. And we have close elections all the time in Kansas. In the last 10 years, from 2004 to now, we've had 24 state legislative or congressional races where the margin was 50 or less, 8 races where the margin was 15 votes or less, 3 races where the margin was 5 votes or less, and 1 race was a dead tie. Do you want a few alien votes in that election? I don't.
Just a wild guess. I think that applause was for you, by the way, not for me coming up to the. Maybe I'm not reading the crowd right. No, I think again. You know, it's funny, we both use this example of the Seward County. Originally wrote that it was Cowley County and then figured out it was Seward County in 1997, the vote on a hog farm. He uses it to show the danger that's out there, and I use it to show that's the worst case he has. It's a 1997 Seward County hog farm vote, which he will admit the election wasn't changed, even if those 50 votes all were fraudulent. It was too big of a margin. So we don't have an example in Kansas of anything that we know was changed by fraud. We say, well, it could have been because of all these close elections. And believe me, I think fraud is a terrible thing that we do need to pursue and prosecute. But I'm saying we don't have evidence in Kansas that it has changed elections to the point where we need to put 18,000 people. We hear a lot about this, that people, you know, even one alien votes, that cancels your vote. Those 18,000 people who filled out as much registration as I would bet any of you in this room did, they have no vote. Their vote has been canceled out before they were even able to file it. And so because of a hog farm vote in Seward County out in liberal Kansas that wasn't changed by fraud, we fundamentally altered the way things are, and we fan fear. And whenever government starts fanning fear and says to protect your right, I need to limit your right, I get concerned. That is a red flag for me in all issues. And yet we are so scared of aliens. It just fills us. So we must have these protections for this sacred right. It is a sacred right. But I am very leery when government uses things like hog farm votes in Seward County to tell me that we're going to limit the right and make it harder for my 18-year-old to register and 18,000 other Kansans. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan, the VoteSmart website shows that through 2008, you were the president of the company you started. Have you been retired since then?
I wish. No, when we sold the company, I have a side. We took a contract, and I'm an employee now. Well, independent contractor for the Congressional Quarterly. It's now Sage Publishing, and so I continue to edit 2 annual books, state rankings and city crime rankings, and then there's a massive database that we have compiled over the 30 years, or 25 years, I guess now, and I continue to work on that. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Oh, thank you. I'm just wondering, should the state's chief election officer have a political action committee that engages in electioneering? I guess it's 2 questions. Is it legal, first of all? And second, is it the right thing to do?
First question, yes, it's legal. All of the statewide elected officers in Kansas are permitted to have a political action committee. The second question, or the built-in question, is it ethical, or is it the right thing to do, is I think the way you phrased it. I think so. We permit our statewide elected officials to endorse people all the time. Previous secretaries of state endorsed other candidates all the time. When you endorse and make personal contributions, when you put your own money behind a candidate, you are putting your very own hard-earned dollars behind that candidate. When you endorse, you are publicly saying that I personally endorse this candidate for that office, even though you're the statewide election officer. So it has been the long practice to put that personal seal of approval and one's personal savings or money behind another candidate. I would argue that a PAC, which I have the Prairie Fire PAC, a PAC is slightly different. It's other people's money, so to speak. It's all the contributors who contribute to the PAC, and then I select candidates with the advice of others who represent the ideals of our conservative base of our Republican Party. So I have promoted candidates. Indeed, the Senate election, one of the candidates that I that I opposed is now my opponent in the general election. Should I have the opportunity to carry the Republican banner? That's Jean Schodorf. The Prairie Fire PAC opposed Jean Schodorf in the 2012 primary because I do not believe that she stood up for the Republican ideals. You know, I take our platform seriously, and I am sick and tired of our Republican Party being abused by people who would not call themselves Republican in any other state. But because they want to get elected in Kansas, they call themselves a Republican, they try to deceive the voters, and I think that is wrong. I want truth in advertising. That's why I'm so very open about what my positions are on the issues, and I think every candidate needs to be very open about what his positions are, and if you're going to run as a Republican, stand for the Republican Party platform, or at least the majority of it.
I agree that it's legal, and like a lot of things that are legal, I don't think it's particularly ethical or appropriate. In fact, I think I would not endorse anyone, nor would I have a PAC if I were Secretary of State. I think this position needs to be largely nonpartisan. I understand the importance of partisanship, but this is the one office where the right to vote trumps everything, and everybody of every stripe in Kansas, and they are all good Kansans, whatever their political feelings, need to have a comfort level that their election they are participating in is fair and has been dealt with appropriately, and that there's no partisanship or games going on. And I think that is something that we've lost here in Kansas, and that's not the way it's been. I worked for Senator Kassebaum and I worked for Senator Dole. They disagreed on some basic issues, but there's not a chance that they would ever do what he did where he issued a press release and said that I needed to change my party affiliation because I wasn't pure enough in my Republicanism. I take issue from someone from Wisconsin telling me as a fifth-generation Kansan who has always been Republican that I'm not Republican enough. And the thought of Bob Dole or Nancy Kassebaum saying that to anybody, I think it's just shocking. Yes, we have partisan differences within our party. We're really good at that, in fact. We've always had problems with that. But it's not a problem, it's vibrancy. And we should embrace it. And I am not running as a Republican in Lawrence because I want to get elected. I assure you, that was not a good move. I did it because I believed in many of the principles which you believe in. And so I support the party, but when it comes to this office, I want all Kansans to feel welcomed and to feel comfortable coming to my office and seeking to make sure we have safe and fair elections. Thank you.
To quickly answer your question, the administration is challenging our proof of citizenship provision right now. I think they're recognizing that the Obama Justice Department and the ACLU have lost the fight for the most part on photo ID. The Constitution, the federal constitutional and federal statutory challenges to photo ID have not held up. And so now they are focusing on a battle they're going to try to win, and that's Kansas and Arizona. There are 4 states that have proof of citizenship: Kansas, Arizona, Georgia, and Alabama. And they're trying to knock down the proof of citizenship provisions. To your point about Wyandotte County, Wyandotte County has a long history of election shenanigans, and one of the reasons that I fought so hard for our security for absentee ballots is that there were also campaigns to fraudulently request other people's absentee ballot in Wyandotte County. This was very common in the past, and that is now impossible because we have these protections so that your signature has to be verified that it's you requesting that absentee ballot, so no one else can vote fraudulently on your behalf. And you know, I want to also touch on something that Mr. Morgan he said, well, all that fraud in Seward County, that doesn't matter for the rest of us. It's not significant enough to justify protecting the registration process. Look, there are many close elections. There's another one that many people think was stolen. That was the Kriegshauser-Reardon general election in 2006 in Overland Park. At the end of the day, Mr. Kriegshauser, the Republican, had won by over 20 votes. I think it was 24, if I remember correctly. But then after the provisional ballots, Mr. Reardon, the Democrat, was ahead by 2 votes. There was a contest afterward. The attorneys had a limited amount of time. They scrambled to try to figure out which votes were the fraudulent ones. And they had lots of candidates. So they knocked on doors of people they believed were the fraudulent voters, but they couldn't find them because they weren't even living at those addresses. It's really hard after the fact to prove fraud. And that's why we've got to put these protections on at the front end. Thank you.
I recognize that voter ID, and I make clear there are two different issues. You have the voter ID, and I know most people know this, and then you have the new requirements for proof of citizenship when you register for the first time or come from out of state. The voter ID is much more popular. People think, well, I have to show my ID to get on an airplane. I have to show it to do lots of things. I would say that there is a difference when you're talking about a right and not a privilege. All of those other things, including getting on an airplane, are privileges. The issue is more not for when you walk in and have to show the ID. The issue does come for advanced voting, and that's when you have the possibility of problems. It does take a constant, as we change the way we vote, and we are going to continue to change the way we vote, because the sacred thing is not how we vote, it's that we vote. And the more people we can get voting, the better. They're not lazy, they are Kansans. And they need to be part of the system, because people outside of the system are a lot scarier than the ones who are in the system and feel like they have a voice. When it comes to voter ID, that's one of those things that needs to be reviewed like any other government regulation to see, is it working? Do we need to be more flexible in terms of the kinds of IDs that we accept? Kansas is fairly good in terms of what we accept. We're not limited to a driver's license. You have other options, because there are a lot of ways to show that you are who you say you are. Now, none of them is a real ID, as that federal program is said, or is identified, but it is another way to catch people who are trying to do this fraud. I also go back to the list that he provided to the legislature. There are 70 cases that he could come together from 97 to 2012. Of those 70 cases, there's 235 instances. We had 10 million people vote during that time. You always have to compare the problem to the solution to what problems your solution will cause. And I think here's another instance where we need to really review this to make sure we're not eliminating genuine Kansans trying to vote. Thank you. The question I was asked was about whether I would favor repeal of, I presume, the voter ID and the birth and the citizenship proof, right? Those are the legislation you're talking about. I do favor repeal of the citizenship requirement. The ID, I lean towards favoring its repeal. In fact, I probably right now would vote, if I had a vote, which of course I won't, but to favor its repeal, but it needs to be reviewed. We do want, and I do want, safe elections, but I also think we had those for 150 years. And I don't think that there's been anything dramatic that has changed in those 150 years in Kansas that has made our elections where people have lost confidence in it. They're starting to lose more confidence by the fact that more elections have been changed by low voter turnout than by voter fraud. And the more that we put up the sense that there are lots of hurdles, lots of restrictions, even if they're not that big, you make people step back, and voting is one of those things, we all say it's precious because all these people have died protecting it. But yet, it doesn't really take as much to dissuade us from voting when you're living your lives with your kids. And you think, well, those are lazy people, or those are people we don't want voting, or it doesn't matter to us. They are Kansans. We want them to vote. And so that's why I favor repeal. I think the registration, the citizenship papers are far too draconian. And the ID, I just want to review and make sure that it isn't causing more problems than it is solving. And I think at this point it is causing more problems.
Next steps, Carl, for secure elections. First of all, we need to win the lawsuits. If you have a Secretary of State who's opposed to our position, he can walk into a negotiation with the ACLU. The ACLU will say, well, let's agree to a stipulated settlement and a judgment. And if you have a Secretary of State who is the party in that lawsuit and he's willing to raise the white flag, then that effectively circumvents the whole legislative process. You have a court order shutting down our laws. So you have got to have a Secretary of State who wants to continue the fight. Secondly, we need to have a reform which both houses of the legislature voted for, but it got messed up in a conference committee. I won't go into the details, but you need to have prosecutorial authority. Right now, only the county attorneys have authority to prosecute election crimes. They are way too busy. The Attorney General does not have prosecutorial authority. The Secretary of State should have prosecutorial authority as well. Both houses voted for that bill. The reason we need it is, and I gave some examples to the legislature, take double voting. That's a slam dunk to prove that. A guy's voted in Kansas and he's voted in Colorado. It's a state crime. It's also a federal crime, but the Obama administration is not interested in prosecuting. Surprise, surprise. And so we have to do it. We sent out 11 double voting crime cases. These were prepared cases. We had all the documents for the county attorneys. It was preset for them. All they had to do is virtually sign their names. And they just didn't get to it. In the majority of cases, they didn't get to it, didn't have time. One point I want to briefly respond to that Mr. Morgan made, he said, you know, you shouldn't have to show an ID when you're exercising a right, like the right to vote. I don't know if Mr. Morgan has, but I purchase a lot of firearms. You have to show a photo ID to exercise your Second Amendment right to purchase the firearms. There's also a fundamental right to travel interstate that is recognized in our Constitution. It's pretty hard to walk across the country. So if you want to drive interstate, you've got to show a photo ID to have that driver's license, or it is your photo ID. You know, we do protect our voting, our privileges, and we protect our rights, but sometimes identity assurance is necessary in part to protect that right even more.
I guess I always love yes or no. No, in answer to your question, but I've got a minute 57, so I'm not going to stop. One thing I wanted to make clear, given that I had so little to choose from there, but is that I am enough of a lawyer that any law that the legislature has passed and is on the books, to the extent that I'm involved with it, will be enforced. I am not one who has such disrespect for the law. Even if I disagree with the law, I would enforce it. But the other thing is, I don't think that the Office of Secretary of State needs to expand after 150 years and have police powers and go out and prosecute. I think we need to work with counties and find out what they need with the Attorney General's office, and if that's a problem that is out there and we have these unprosecuted cases, there are solutions short of expanding that office. Oddly, I'm the liberal here, I guess, but yet I'm not the one who's against expanding the powers of that office. And I think that that is consistent with republicanism, and I'm comfortable with it. In answer to the question about the beyond on the voter ID, I said that I would vote against it if I had a vote right now, but I'm open to it in terms of finding out if it is a problem and if it is an easy solution out there in terms of expanding the kinds of IDs we take. Remember, this is still just it is not if we really wanted to lock it down, we need to get national ID or get a real ID, and we can all get our eyes scanned, and then we can go in and be who we are and take care of it. We have a lot of pushback in our party for that kind of thing because we don't like those kinds of idea of a national ID. I don't either. So I get a little uncomfortable with this whole idea that we're uncomfortable with it as a national ID, but we're okay with it on issues where we want it. And so there's a little inconsistency there, but I am troubled by it, but the answer I will stick by is no.
I'd like to respond to two things Mr. Morgan said. He said that he's troubled by there being an additional potential prosecutor out there, and that as a small government person that we should agree with him. Oh, wait a minute. The reason we oppose bigger government is because it restricts our liberties. The law is already there. It's against the law to double vote. So if you bring to the table an additional prosecutor, your liberties have not been restricted. Your behavior is the same, your permissible behavior is the same in the status quo ante as it is in the new status quo. You still are not permitted to vote twice. All you're doing is adding a prosecutor, which makes the government more effective in enforcing the law that is already on the books. It's an important distinction. We can't just say big government, small government, good, bad, good. You have to be very precise about this. Secondly, he says that photo ID is not something he would like to see in our elections. Look, photo ID is part of American life today. You want to open a checking account, you need a photo ID. You want to board a plane, you need a photo ID. You want to go to the federal courthouse, you need a photo ID. You want to buy the kind of Sudafed that works, you need a photo ID. You want to go to, in Illinois, if you want to buy Drano, you need a photo ID. I'm not quite sure what the problem is there. But you need a photo ID to exist in American society. And if you don't have one, welcome to Kansas, we'll give you a free one. And that's what our law provides. And so that makes it so simple to not only vote, but to enter the 21st century for the tiny, tiny number of people who didn't have a photo ID. Oh, and if you're 65 or older, you can use an expired photo ID, that favorite driver's license from 20 years ago where your hair looked just right and you really looked good on that day for the photo. Look, And Kansans are not having a problem with this. In the 2012 presidential election, 0.07% of people didn't show up with a photo ID. That's less than 1 in 1,000 voters. And all of them had the opportunity to bring their photo ID in the week afterward. Many of them chose to do so. And we did some analysis after the fact to see if they had driver's licenses. Turned out that virtually all of them had driver's licenses as well.
Thank you again for having me here today. I know that I'm not everyone's cup of tea in this room, but I really appreciate the respect you've shown, and I appreciate the courtesies that have been extended in the invitation. I think this is what makes this country so phenomenal. My son just graduated from the Air Force Academy, and when I see what this next generation is willing to do for this country, I really do care. And that's why I'm doing this. I want people to have a choice. And I understand that we're scared about a lot of things, but we should be so much more excited about what this future has. And I really appreciate what you all represent in terms of the process that makes us unique on this planet. That we don't shoot each other. We sit there, and even though you disagree strongly with what I'm saying, you show me this respect, you sit there and show the courtesies. We need to celebrate this more. And I am so honored to have taken part in this. I'm honored to have been here. And whatever you do, obviously, I would love your vote, I think, on August 5th. But however this works, I have enjoyed so much getting around the state and meeting all the different people again. And I'm so glad I raised my 3 kids here, because this is unique among a unique country. So thank you all, and God bless us all. Thank you.
Well, I'll echo what Mr. Morgan said on that last point. It is a great place to raise your kids. Kansas is, I believe, the best state in the union for a variety of reasons. And I'm particularly happy that Reagan got to see her daddy in her first debate today. So that's exciting. But that's part of what it is to be an American. We have elections, hopefully fair elections, and that's how we choose our leaders. She was just asking me on the way down here if there are other countries where how the other countries of the world do this, and do they all have kings still in every place but America? We had a little discussion about the rest of the world. But you know, not only can we improve our elections as we have in Kansas and become the model for the rest of the country, we can do this with spending less money. That, in my mind, is a real accomplishment that I haven't talked about and I want to close with. When I became Secretary of State, I said, you know what? I'm tired of government officials saying, well, we're going to keep the budget from growing, and they say, we'll just grow at the rate of inflation and that'll be about right, or inflation plus net increase in population. In my agency, we are spending less today than we were spending in the year 2010. In other words, we're dropping in the amount of money that we're spending. That's not only slower growth, that's a reduction in government spending. And I think I'm the only agency, mine is the only agency in Kansas government that can claim that. So when I talk about smaller government, I want the rubber to hit the road in my agency, and we do that, smaller government. Now, how do we do it? Well, one of the ways we do it is we try to reduce the size of the agency. I happen to believe that there are too many people employed by government in the state of Kansas. And so we have reduced the size of my agency by 14%. And the way you do that is not by throwing people out on the street, but when people retire, as the baby boomers are retiring, you see if there's a way you can keep on going without replacing that position in the agency. And that's how we've reduced our payroll by 14%. It's business thinking, it's common sense, it's Kansas thinking, and that's what I'm going to continue to bring to the Secretary of State's office.
Scott Morgan and Chris Kobach. Let's give them a big hand.